there are many ways to test the power of an explosion. Calculations, for one. Engineers can use their computers to predict how structures will respond to different bombs, often with uncanny precision. But in the end, in the military, it is almost commonplace to build the building in question and then destroy it. These hardened aircraft shelters are subjected to the blistering shock waves of massive explosions, detonated both outside and inside the hangars. Each test replicates an expected wartime condition: a near hit, a direct hit, an explosion from within, concluding with the ultimate test, the shock wave of a nuclear bomb. In this case, a simulated nuclear attack.
A large crowd of visitors assembled on the site for the fifth and last explosion of the series. NATO countries such as Great Britain, Norway, and Sweden were represented in the observer group, as were visitors from Singapore. Heading the distinguished guest list was Lieutenant General Noor, the White Sands Missile Range commander, who was greeted on arrival by Brigadier General Brown, the commander of the Defense Nuclear Agency's Field Command at Kirtland Air Force Base, New Mexico. Guests were seated in a specially constructed grandstand located approximately 7 miles from the test site.
One forgotten Department of Defense program took on the unusual mission of documenting these explosions, and as such, it presents a rare opportunity to examine blast effects through the lens of an ultra-high-speed camera.
The source of the detonation was 48 Mark 82 bombs containing 9,500 pounds of tritonol. The shelter was completely destroyed. The front doors were blown outward and pieces traveled 5 to 1,200 feet. The rear walls separated from the side walls. The rear doors exploded into the blast deflector, and the blast deflector generator room was completely fragmented. Chunks of concrete and steel as large as 4 cubic yards were ejected 500 feet. Fragments were found 1,500 feet from the shelter. Smaller were distributed over a wide area.
The practice of real-time tests with real weapons and real targets is as old as the military itself. This F-4 Phantom, for instance, withstood a full blast effects test to determine its resistance to an explosion on the adjacent tarmac, a bomb dropping, for instance, or a fuel bunker exploding. The resulting footage is spectacular, even if the test showed a disappointing end. The Phantom, in this case, was completely destroyed. Such was the nature of blast effects testing. Nothing, though, no F-4 Phantom nor hardened aircraft shelter, compares with America's nuclear testing programs. Begun in 1948 and carried out through the end of 1961, the Department of Defense and Department of Energy designed endless tests to subject ships, buildings, equipment, material, even soldiers and airmen, to the direct effects of nuclear explosions. Those involved in these tests would become more than just human guinea pigs. Indeed, they would become the guinea pigs of the atomic era.
Airplanes, jeeps, food, clothing, trucks, and armored cars. Everything from canned milk to tanks will be subjected to the blast. Different animals have been placed aboard the ships to substitute for military personnel. Some were shaved in order that the effects of heat and radiation on their skins could be observed and the results applied to the design of protective clothing. Numerous towers have been erected on Bikini Atoll. Within these steel structures will be housed the remotely controlled photographic, electronic, and other scientific instruments that will automatically record the results of the blast. Atop some of these towers, encased in huge lead vaults, cameras have been strategically placed to capture as much detail as possible.
While the first nuclear explosion proved that the bombs worked, and the next two ended World War II, the fourth was a test. It was called Operation Crossroads, and it served just one purpose: to develop a military understanding of the effects of a nuclear bomb, particularly against warships and the material they might carry.
Anchored in the sheltered waters of the Bikini Lagoon below is an array of almost every type of naval vessel used in the past war. Here is the venerable old carrier Saratoga, the battleship Pennsylvania, flagship of World War I. USS Nevada was designated the target ship and strategically placed. Being painted white topside would make her easier to spot from the air.
These sequences, and many others in this program, were obtained from official film archives, classified top secret for almost 50 years, and released in the late 1990s. They provide a remarkably candid assessment of nuclear weapons effects.
While the Navy concentrated its efforts at Bikini, the Manhattan Project's scientists at Kwajalein were busy assembling the atomic bomb, taking special precautions to ensure its safe disposal. Ground crews indoctrinated in the procedure of handling such a weapon. A bombing crew was competitively chosen. Major Swancutt, the pilot. Major Wood, the bombardier. The B-29 Dave's Dream would carry them to the target. While the bomber is poised on the loading ramp, pilots and crews receive their final orders from an Army Air Force officer.
The Operation Crossroads test culminated by dropping a fully operational nuclear bomb directly into the center of the small flotilla of naval ships anchored in the lagoon. In these views, vessels are actually lifted high into the air by the force of the explosion. In others, note the relentless spread of highly radioactive water dispersed by the blast. Crossroads was a crossroad in more than name alone. It was the first post-World War II nuclear detonation, and the first of what would become years and years of military personnel being exposed to the effects of nuclear bombs. Military inspection teams are here immediately after the drop, motoring around the targets at ground zero. Although the day is bright and clear, the ships around them are thoroughly contaminated, and yet they examine the hulls for breaches at almost a leisurely pace.
Tumbler Shot 2, 15 April, 1952. The weapon for Tumbler Shot number 2 is the same size as the one detonated over Frenchman Flat. Yield, 1 kiloton. Height of burst, 1,100 feet.
Crossroads was followed by Operation Tumbler Snapper, one of the most thorough investigations of atomic effects yet. Again, nuclear bombs were airdropped, and again they fell into a prearranged grid, this time with aircraft, tanks, homes, rail cars, and other objects placed along lines radiating outward from ground zero.
After a shot, we're all anxious to get back to our test setups and see for ourselves what happened. The data is here. It only needs to be recovered and analyzed in order to be applied to the plans and problems of atomic warfare. Among other things, we learned that bombers do receive more damage than fighters. Jet aircraft generally sustain less damage. Planes at a side orientation to the burst receive the greatest damage. In all cases, damage is closely related to the height of burst, distance from ground zero, and kiloton yield of the bomb. Planes in some cases can be returned to operational status after exposure to an atomic detonation. Some can go into operation immediately. Hopefully, this program will give our military planners a great deal of new and vitally important offensive and defensive information.
One of the most troubling series of tests were the tumbler snapper troop tests. The idea was essentially sound, that there was less to fear from a nuclear bomb than commonly believed. With a proper shelter and the right distance from the blast, soldiers would survive the blast unharmed. But how do you convince the forces? The military answer was to dig trenches, bring in the troops, and drop bombs. It was a period of remarkable naivete.
Shot day. Camp Desert Rock. H-5 hours. Throughout much of recorded military history, it is clear that the effectiveness of troops is geared to their psychological attitude towards the weapons used and situations encountered. At their base camp, Desert Rock, these men are mustering for an atomic warfare maneuver, only the second series of its kind in history. Though they are very much a part of Tumbler Snapper, they operate independently as they would on a military maneuver. They've all been thoroughly briefed on the hazards, precautions, and techniques of their tactical operations in the area of a nuclear operation. After the time check, the word is roll out. Every man is accounted for. Every man has his own film badge to record the degree of his own personal exposure. Every group is accompanied by trained radiological safety monitors to be with them in the contaminated area. Yucca Flat, Desert Rock Entrenchment Area, 4 miles from ground zero, H-90 minutes. Like all too many people, both in and out of the military, Before these men got their assignment for this operation, they had many misconceptions about the bomb and its effects. Some of them thought they would never again be able to have families. Some of them expected to be deaf or blind. Some of them expected to glow for hours after the bomb went off. Like so many people, many of them were afraid. They had never taken the time or invested the effort to learn the facts about what to do in case of atomic warfare. These men have been indoctrinated in what goes on and what to do when the bomb goes off. Any doubts that are left will be eliminated after the full experience of this operation. Planning-level observers from throughout the defense establishment have an opportunity to study the maneuvers from close range. H hour minus 5 minutes.
May I have your attention? The B-50 drop aircraft you see overhead is the drop plane on its bombing run. The time of fall will be 40 seconds. You will hear the countdown from the bomb away until the burst time. Remain in your holes until the command raise has been given at H plus 3 seconds. If you stand up too soon, the intense light will temporarily blind you, and the heat will give you the equivalent of a severe sunburn. When the command raise has been given, stand up and lean against the rear of your foxhole. This will brace you against the shock wave, which will arrive at this point at burst time plus 25 seconds. It is now H minus 2 minutes. Everyone kneel down in your foxholes, look down, and stay down. Seven, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Before the Desert Rock maneuver can proceed, before anybody can go back to his test setups to recover instruments and information, the entire blast area gets a radiological survey a matter of minutes after the shot. The armed forces are responsible for all radiological safety on the operation. This is very important experience for military preparedness as well. The helicopters can hover close to the ground, survey and double-check any questionable areas. Re-entry routes and procedures are determined accordingly by the men of RadSafe Operations and the commanding general of Desert Rock. On 3 of the tumbler shots, the Strategic Air Command operated bombers at operational altitudes above the bursts. This is another part of the Defense Establishment program to give more service people the experience and confidence for atomic warfare operations. We re-enter our display areas close to Ground Zero once RadSafe okays us for the move up. Since the biggest value of the operation is for us to prove to ourselves that it can be done and find any weak points in the training, psychiatrists are with us to study our reactions before, during, and after the experience. No one can ever fully make you realize what you see or feel when you experience an atomic weapon detonated for the first time. It's quite an experience, no matter where you are to watch it. This kind of experience is immensely valuable for any military man, and it will be a part of tactical training for a great many Army and Marine field forces in the future. In the minds of many of the men, there was doubt and fear before. Now there is confidence. Confidence that comes only from experience. Just treat it with respect rather than fear. Use a little common sense and observe a few basic precautions. After the walkthrough, we move back out of the contaminated zone to our parking area. We made it, and so can anyone else who goes through this kind of operation. 3 months ago, all the gold in Fort Knox wouldn't have made us want to do it. Now, we wouldn't take anything for the experience. We proved a lot to ourselves, and to a lot of other people who need to know it can be done, and we're proud of it.
Despite the bravado of these 1950s films, troops participating in Operation Desert Rock have suffered mightily. Among veterans, the incidence of cancer has been high, and many rare and difficult-to-treat tumors have been reported. Nuclear effects are deceptive. It is as important to prevent radioactive exposure as it is to survive the blast. Walking through contaminated debris is now thought to be as deadly as the initial detonation. It just takes longer.
Radioactive atomic cloud. Cloud trackers are already on their station around the cloud, plotting its course and size, making observations of contaminated air, standing by to warn ground stations should the radioactive mass change its course to pass over occupied zones. The RadSafe monitor keeps the aircraft at a safe distance. As the cloud lifts, the survey plane sweeps low over the radioactive crater. Monitors take accurate radiological readings of the most contaminated of the blasted areas.
Many others were put at risk during atomic tests. Snifter aircraft, for example, were flown directly into the boiling mushroom cloud to determine the precise weapon yield. At first, drone B-17s did the job of sampling the clouds. Because no pilot was on board, the mission was safe and no humans were put at risk. All that changed, though, once the plane was on the ground.
Their mission of cloud penetration complete, the drones are returned to Eniwetok. Air control is relinquished to the ground crews. Landing is effected by an electronic system similar to that used in the control plane. This is the crucial moment in the drone operation, and all hands sweat in these unmanned B-17s with their cargo of priceless scientific samples. Because of radioactivity gathered within the cloud, the drones are dangerous, and mechanical devices are used whenever possible to prevent the exposure of personnel. As a safety precaution, Personnel are exposed to radioactivity for only a minimum period of time. Filter papers containing the samples are removed from the trap. After packing in lead containers, they're prepared for air shipment to laboratories within the United States. After removal of the samples, the drones are decontaminated with a special cleansing solution.
F-84Gs. Manned jet fighters are being used exclusively on this operation. Experience has proven that manned aircraft are just as efficient and much less costly to put in the air than our drones for sample collecting. Jets were selected because they can operate at high altitude. Since the force of Mike shot has pushed the cloud up to around 100,000 feet, it is necessary to get aircraft up high enough to get reliable samples. Even at that, they're scraping the bottom of the barrel, so to speak. Some 14 F-84Gs are being used at staggered intervals to get a good cross-section of the cloud at different times. The jets, which are based on Kwajalein, also have the speed necessary to make them good sample collecting machines. For the relatively short length of time the pilot is in the area, he gets a good sample per rate of contamination. A B-36 is also in the air as another kind of control ship, like a football coach running the game from the sidelines. A scientific controller watches the formation of the cloud and directs the samplers in for their runs. When a sampler aircraft has obtained its allotment of contamination, it has done its job and returns to Quaj.
The switchover from unmanned drones to manned jets again increased the numbers of military personnel exposed to radioactive material. Moreover, this increase was not a one-for-one swap. A dozen or more manned jets now crisscrossed each cloud, returning with their wingtip pods full of hot material. On the ground, one safeguard after the other was developed to minimize exposure, but most were overly simplistic, as this video shows, and incredibly ineffective. Cancer rates among these veterans have also been high.
This fighter has just returned from a mission that took it through clouds contaminated by radiation. The decontamination crew will hose down the plane if necessary, to minimize the possibility of adding additional contamination to the working area.
As the years progressed, more sophisticated safeguards were developed, including masks, gloves, and airtight boots. This pilot avoids contact with the hot aircraft skin by jumping into the waiting truck. Simple but effective. Nuclear weapons indeed became completely woven into the military, and soon choosing the right bomb for the job was nothing more complex than choosing the right missile or rocket. Some were better for above-the-ground detonations, others were better below the ground. The pluses and minuses were neatly totaled in the tables and available to anyone with a security clearance.
In some aspects, the effects of an underground detonation are similar to an underwater burst. As in the case of an underwater burst, there are no direct thermal or nuclear radiation effects on surface targets. The air blast is somewhat lower than from a comparable surface or low airburst weapon, while underground shock is maximized. Most of the radioactive fission fragments are trapped in the dirt. Thrown up by the explosion, radioactive particles fall out on the target area, creating dangerous surface contamination. As in the case of the underwater detonation, this residual radiation will tend to restrict occupation of the area for a considerable length of time. A weapon with a yield around 20 kilotons, burst in dry soil 50 feet below the surface, will produce a crater approximately 650 feet in diameter and 140 feet deep. This cratering action, plus residual radiation, effectively denies the area to personnel, making an underground detonation effective against specific targets, including underground structures. The surface burst has some characteristics of both underground and air bursts. In a ground level burst, the thermal effect may be degraded due to absorption by the ground and the dust skirt. Blast overpressure, however, is much greater than with the underground burst. Residual radiation, being so much greater than the militarily insignificant amounts left after an air burst, contaminate large areas and have a definite effect upon tactical situations. The crater made by a surface burst is sizable, although its dimensions are much less than those from an underground detonation of comparable yield. All types of nuclear bursts must be evaluated, since each type has specific areas of greatest effectiveness. Residual radiation to contaminate areas. Blast to destroy structures. Thermal and nuclear radiation to kill personnel. A nuclear weapon represents potentials outside the concepts of conventional weapons. But this is not an ultimate weapon, nor one calling for unreasoning fear. It is merely another arm, another addition to our national arsenal.
Nuclear testing became an abstract. The explosions were so commonplace that they were carried live on the morning TV news, and viewing stands were erected to accommodate official guests. Bombs somehow seemed okay, if that is possible.
Light, although not a primary casualty producer, can cause temporary flash blindness to unshielded eyes. In addition, anyone looking directly at a nuclear explosion may suffer permanent eye damage even at very large ranges. Readily visible, day or night, the intense flash of white light is an easy identifying mark of the nuclear burst. No other type of explosion can equal it.
What everyone seemed to forget was this: Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the real story of nuclear effects, the true picture of the violence against homes, buildings, indeed, the flesh of man. Nuclear weapons are massively destructive. Years and years of controlled testing in the Pacific and at the Nevada Proving Grounds minimized the bomb, made it seem controllable, but it's not. Once triggered, the A-bomb leaves scientists with a landscape like this to analyze, not the neat blast lines of Frenchman's Flat or the well-spaced ships of Bikini Lagoon.
In general, the effects of blast on personnel are largely indirect. In the case of the atomic bomb, the explosion was so high in the air that even directly below, the blast pressure was not of sufficient intensity to cause injuries more serious than ruptured eardrums. The indirect results of blast, nevertheless, brought about the majority of casualties by means of falling debris, flying glass, and so forth. As can be seen from this example of the damage done by the blast of the atomic bomb, face-on blast pressures are more intense than the side-on pressure. Near ground zero, the blast struck almost vertically down, as these roofs indicate. At somewhat greater distances, both horizontal and vertical components were exposed to the blast wave, and buildings sustained damage to roofs and walls facing the explosion. At considerable distances, where the blast was traveling in an almost horizontal direction, damage occurred predominantly to walls. In some cases, buildings were completely wrecked. The flash of radiant heat generated by the explosion of the atomic bomb was intense enough to char wood as far away as 2 miles from ground zero. But because of its short duration, even a leaf could afford protection from it. Because the flash heat wave preceded the blast wave, much combustible material was protected by such things as tile roofs and shutters, which remained intact until they were stove in by the blast. Although the heat wave was not the major cause of primary fire, its intensity should not be underestimated. At Hiroshima, roof tile was bubbled 4,000 feet out from ground zero, indicating a temperature well in excess of 1,800 degrees centigrade. The intensity of the initial flash is again illustrated by the shadows of a victim and his cart, which were etched in the pavement by the radiant heat. This reenactment shows how it occurred. Gamma rays struck people only at the instant of explosion, but deaths from gamma radiations did not begin until about a week after exposure for those who were near the center of explosion. They reached a peak in 3 to 4 weeks for those affected up to 3,000 feet from ground zero. It is difficult to estimate the total casualties which might have resulted from gamma rays because of the number of people killed as an immediate result of the explosion. A large number theoretically died many times over, since they were subject to simultaneous injuries, any one of which would have been fatal. There apparently have been no first-generation effects on vegetation. However, pronounced mutations may not be visible until the second, third, or fourth generation, and these may be lasting effects. Both at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, pockets of radioactivity were detected where fission products were generally deposited. But the degree of activity in these areas was not sufficient to produce casualties.
Human testing will always be part of the development of weapons and weapons delivery systems, and the years have proven that it can be safe. The human testing of nuclear effects, however, stands as an aberration, a grotesque miscue. Troops, pilots, naval personnel, and countless others found that they were nuclear guinea pigs, standing at ground zero, trying to believe that somehow this was all right.